Castroman, who many of you know, I'm sure. Emilio is a native of Argentina. In 1981, he left his successful career with the government and his design and building company to become a Christian Science nurse. And then later on, after completing that ministry, he entered the full-time public practice in San Francisco, where I met him. And I have to actually share that Emilio helped me while I was working at a hospital in San Francisco when I had a major fall and had a very, very quick healing in 3 days. And all the doctors in my office were amazed. He has served on many church posts, uh, and you can read the rest of his bio in our announcement. But I think it's important to point out that he was also a volunteer chaplain in San Quentin, which is very hard to get into. Currently, he helps conduct Sunday school services in Spanish online for the Mother Church and a Sunday school teacher in the Principia College campus. Without much further ado, I would love to introduce Emilio Castroman, whose talk is entitled Nursing Through the Lens of Christ.
Thank you, Marvick. Thank you so much and for your kind introduction. And can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Right? Dear friends, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today, I would like to invite you to explore together with me the idea of nursing through the lens of Christ. A lens is a tool, like an extremely clear piece of glass in a telescope, used for directing and focusing light that passes through it in order to see something as clearly as possible. You might consider that each of us has a lens that affects how we see and perceive things in our experience. Depending on how clear that lens is, determines the clarity and accuracy of our focus. You may remember a statement that Mary Baker Eddy wrote in Science and Health about how Jesus perceived situations. She wrote, Jesus beheld in science the perfect man who appeared to him where sin in mortal man appears to mortals. In this perfect man, the Savior saw God's own likeness. And this correct view of man healed the sick. We find a further explanation in the passage from the message from 1901, also by Mrs. Eddy. The lens of science magnifies the divine power to human sight, and we then see the allness of spirit, therefore the nothingness of matter. Christ is the lens of spiritual knowing, seeing the radiant omnipotence and majesty of divine love, directing and focusing human thought, enabling us to see and understand the reality of God's creation. Today, we are going to look at some of Jesus' healings through this lens. Let's start with a healing recorded in Matthew of a man who was paralyzed. Then said he, Jesus, to the sick of the palsy, arise, take up thy bed, and go unto thine house. And he arose and departed to his house. What did Jesus see in this situation? Did he see crippled muscles, nerves, and bones? Did he perceive this to be the true condition of the man which was in front of him? In other words, how much of the palsy or the problem did Jesus focus his attention on? What was the Christ within him? The spiritual knowing, seen right there. What was the Christ revealing to Jesus' thinking? What was the Christ voicing to Jesus' understanding? And what was the effect of this view of man? The answer is evident in his response. You remember? Arise, take up thy bed, and go unto thine house. Jesus was seen with the lens of Christ, God's perfect view of his image and likeness, through the corrective lens of truth and love in human consciousness. In the article entitled The Activity of the Christ by Ivy Walter from the Christian Science Journal, the author writes, the Christ demonstrates the fundamental facts that harmony has never been lost, that discord has never been real, and that perfection has never been impaired. Let's take a moment and look through the lens of Christ at whatever may appear paralyzed in our lives, relationships, our job, our progress, our future, and say with Christ, harmony has never been lost. Discord has never been real, and perfection has never been impaired. Progress has never been blocked, impeded, or hindered, because the Christ-like understanding of all that ever has existed only includes the perfect God and a perfect man. So let's take a minute and do it silently. You get to work now. So anything that is paralyzed and impeded in our lives, right there, the Christ is bringing the clear view, the reality of God's creation. Thank you. Let's consider another healings of Jesus, and this is also from Matthew, and it's a man with a withered hand. As you remember, Jesus said to the man, stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole, like the other. Did you hear what Jesus asked him to do? What did he see that prompted this apparently impossible request? What did Christ see? What did Christ did not see? Let's take a moment and discern through the lens of Christ whatever may appear withered in our lives, in our families, or in the world. And say with the Christ, let's unite with this voice that harmony has never been lost, that discord has never been real. That perfection has never been impaired. Because, that's the reason, the Christ-like understanding of all that ever has existed only includes a perfect God and a perfect man. So let's take a minute. There is nothing withered in God, life, eternal good, and there is nothing withered in his reflection, man. Thank you. Now let's consider another of Jesus' healing, and this is from John, and very familiar to all of us. Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes. Jesus said unto them, "Loose him and let him go." Was Lazarus' body alive before Jesus called him? How did he see it? What was the Christ seeing? What was the Christ revealing? What was the Christ voicing to Jesus' understanding? The answer is in his own words, "Lazarus, come forth." What a reassurance. What clarity of his understanding of reality, of truth, of God's creation. So let's take a moment and see through the lens of Christ whatever goodness may appear to have ceased in our lives, our health, our purpose, and say with the Christ, harmony has never been lost. Discord has never been real. And that perfection has never been impaired because the Christ-like understanding of all that ever has existed only includes a perfect God and perfect man. Let's take a minute. Thank you. Let's continue. And now let's consider the healing of a child with cataracts by Mrs. Eddy. Norwood's Reminiscence wrote about Mrs. Eddy when a child was brought to her with a cataract on each eye, blind. Mrs. Eddy said that she began to talk to her of God, true, and love, when the child, animated by error, stamped her foot and said, "I hate you. I hate you. I could sit up all night to hate you." And Mrs. Eddy replied, "My darling, I love you. I love you. Why, I could sit up all night to love you." And at once the cataracts fell out and the child saw. Could we also take a minute and voice with Christ to ourselves, neighbors, community, and the entire world, I love you. I love you. I am sitting up all day and night to love you. And we do that with every service, every prayers, every daily consideration, embracing our community and the world. So let's do it now at this moment. So it is the light of Christ that illumines our understanding of a spiritual, indestructible life that is timeless, ageless, diseaseless, and deathless. Let's take a look at a healing of a child in a youth camp. One late morning, I got a call from a young camper asking for help. When I went to see her, she was crying and not feeling well. As I was reaching out to the Christ for help, I was prompted to ask her if she knew any of the prayers that she had learned in Sunday school. She stopped crying and turned to me and said, "You name it, I know it." I had to struggle to keep from laughing out loud. Her spontaneous answer revealed her attitude towards healing. Then I asked her, "How about the scientific statement of being?" She nodded, and we began to pray aloud. And as soon as we reached the end, she pulled on my arm and said, "Let's go and have lunch now together." And we did. She was completely healed. We both felt the uplifting of thought from the Christ embracing us spiritually. One evening, a friend from Buenos Aires, Argentina, who was out and about, called saying that she was having a heart attack, and she was describing all the pressing symptoms she was facing. At that moment, with deep compassion, I reached out to the Christ, the spiritual truth, and I heard from my lips, "You are not under pressure. You are under the grace of God." The chest pain stopped. The agitation slowed down. All symptoms were silenced. Half an hour later, she called me back saying that she was able to get home and was feeling free from all the symptoms. Through the grace of God, we witnessed the majesty and power of His Christ. Now, in a recent call that a friend gave me, that she works in the healthcare field, in her call, she indicated that she was feeling all the symptoms of COVID-19. But one of the most aggressive mental suggestions was that she would have to completely change the way she worked because of the restrictions imposed that suggested fear and mistrust with her patients, community, and everyone that she was in contact with. Sounds familiar? She was concerned that the way she used to provide tender, loving care with her skills, compassion, warmth, and affection was going to end. Fear was controlling her thoughts. Her husband became her caregiver, daily and lovingly attending to her needs as she was almost paralyzed without any strength. Her children, living overseas, daily called, reassuring her of love's care for God, of God's loving care for her. And often they pray together. A daily Christian Science treatment was given, citations indicating God's power and presence were shared. This daily expression of a Christ was a mental vaccine of tenderness, love, and truth, completely repelling the fear and error, bringing freedom and healing. 2 weeks later, she was whole and restored and back about her father's business. In all the healings we have looked at together through the lens of Christ, we see the need is to reject the temptation to accept the illusion or distorted view of sickness, sin, and death. Like all committed followers of Christ, Christian Science nurses also work to gain and maintain this view of man. An author describes this kind of nursing in a Sentinel article, and she writes, the ability to express cheerfulness in the face of suffering begins with a willingness to deny self the material appearance of life and acknowledge God's spiritual law of health and harmony as governing everyone right now. It includes the willingness and conviction to say to oneself, no matter what I see, hear, feel, or smell, the scientific truth is that this individual is an immortal spiritual idea whom God loves and maintains in perfection. This is by Giving Evidence of God's Presence by Margaret Rogers from the Christian Science Sentinel. Mrs. Eddy tells us that Christ is the true idea, voicing good. That Christ is the divine message from God to us, to everyone. This is our spiritual reassurance. Christ is speaking to the human consciousness everywhere, all the time. This provides our spiritual guidance and understanding. Christ is incorporeal, spiritual, the divine image and likeness of a spirit, God. This brings to light the true formations of God's creation. Christ dispels the illusions of the senses. This corrects our optics and perspective from error, distractions, falsehoods, fantasies, dreams, and imaginations. Christ is the way, we are told by Mrs. Eddy, the truth and the life, healing the sick, casting out evils, destroying sin, disease, and death. This shows the path of our destination, the realm of soul, supreme harmony. Christ attributes all power to God, good. This shows the true condition of substance and existence, that only good is the reality. Christian Science nursing is a way of Christ seeing and understanding and demonstrating the promise of restoration, comfort, and healing. The Christly message helps us to meet the moral demand by revealing the truth of divine principle and love that leads to all truth. As you remember, Mrs. Eddy talks about the moral demand in this way in Science and Health. She writes, until the facts concerning error, namely its nothingness, appears, the moral demand will not be met, and the ability to make nothing of error will be wanting. And then she also shares some insights, and this is in miscellaneous writings. If God does not recognize matter, how did Jesus, who was the way, the truth, and the life, cognize it? Christ Jesus' sense of matter was the opposite of that which mortals entertain. His nativity was a spiritual and immortal sense of the ideal world. His earthly mission was to translate substance into its original meaning, mind. He walked upon the waves. He turned the water into wine. He healed the sick and the sinner. He raised the dead and rolled away the stone from the door of his own tomb. His demonstration of spirit virtually vanquished matter and its supposed laws. Walking the way, he proved the fallacy of the theory that matter is substance. Healing through mind, he removed any supposition that matter is intelligence or can recognize or express pain or pleasure. His triumph over the grave was an everlasting victory for life. He demonstrated the lifelessness of matter and the power and permanence of spirit. If you and I will admit what Mrs. Eddy tells us, that matter is neither substance, intelligence, nor life, we may have all that is left of it, and we will have touched the hem of the garments of Jesus' idea of matter. End of quote. To nurse through the lens of Christ is to let the Christ, no material and human perspective, guide our thoughts and conclusions, our methods and actions. Jesus saw many things, good and bad, but the Christliness of his thought guided him with the light of a spiritual reality and healing. As you remember, Mrs. Eddy writes, there is but one way to heaven, harmony, and Christ in divine science shows us this way. It is to know no other reality, to have no other consciousness of life than good, God and his reflection, and to rise superior to the so-called pain and pleasure of the senses. Jesus met the first demand of his science, which is, as you remember from Science and Health, thou shalt have no other gods before me. This me is spirit. So the command that he obeyed was that he refused to have other intelligence, other life, other substance, other truth, other love, but that which was spiritual, pure. He could not do it alone. He needed the lens of Christ, actively guiding and strengthening his step. his every step. Jesus showed that to walk with Christ leads to the mental emancipation, to deliverance from the shackles of sin, sickness, and death. Yes, to the removal of all oppression, to receive our heritage of freedom, our God-given dominion over the material senses. The lens of Christ brings the spiritual focus to our thoughts, so it can align itself with truth or the reality of God's creation. Hymn number 507 brings a wonderful sense of connection with the Christ Spirit. As you probably remember, this is a very simple, a beautiful hymn. The first verse reads, I'm gonna live so God can use me anytime and anywhere. And we could interpret this, I'm gonna live so I can see Christly freedom today. The second verse reads, I'm gonna work so God can use me anytime and anywhere. And we could say, I'm gonna work so I can see Christly restoration today. And the third verse reads, I'm gonna pray so God can use me anytime and anywhere. And we could say, I'm gonna pray so I can see Christly dominion today. And the last verse reads, I'm gonna sing so God can use me anytime and anywhere. And we could say, I'm gonna sing so I can see Christly healing today. Dr. Carl P. Down, a professor of hymnology from Boston University School of Theology, and one of the world's leading hymn scholars, singles out the phrase, so God can use me. And he comments, this is a remarkable statement of intention. This hope of being of use for God's purposes does not seek a personal reward or praise or credit. It is a selfless offering of oneself, not a self-centered promotion of oneself. And Dr. Ryan Vigil, another hymn scholar, indicates that to him this means to serve. I am going to live to serve God. That to be in God's service is to minister to and attend to someone's needs. So, what shall we do now? Well, let's sing hymn 507 together. And let's see. We have it all ready, and all right, can you all see?
Mhm.
Okay, let's see if we can now. can use me anytime and anywhere. I'm gonna be so. God can use me anytime and anywhere. So God can use me anytime and anywhere. I'm gonna be so. God can use me anytime and anywhere. Praise God can use me anytime and anywhere. I'm gonna praise God can use me anytime and anywhere. Sing songs God can use me anytime and anywhere. I'm gonna sing songs God can use me anytime and anywhere. Anytime and anywhere. Nursing through the lens of Christ is the spiritual intention to serve God and His purpose, Spirit's purpose, which does not seek a reward or praise or credit or approval in material terms. It is a selfless offering of oneself, one's thoughts, one's feelings, and one's actions in God's spiritual service to minister, to attend someone's needs. It is to consecrate one's skills in comfort's arts to reflect the Christ-like touch. And a benediction from Psalms. I hear the Lord saying, I will stay close to you, instructing and guiding you along the pathway of your life. I will advise you along the way and lead you forth with my eyes as your guide. Thank you so much.